Contacting that. There is something. There is a reality which is beyond all our expressions, but which we can succeed in contacting by practicing a discipline. We can identify ourselves with it. Once one is identified with it, one knows what it is, but one cannot express it, for words cannot say it. So, if you use one kind of vocabulary, if you have a particular mental conviction, you will use the vocabulary corresponding to that conviction. If you belong to another group, which has another way of speaking, you will call it or even think about it in that way. I am telling you this to give you the true impression that there is something there which cannot be grasped by thought, but which exists. But the name you give it matters little. That's of no importance. It exists. And so, the only thing to do is to enter into contact with it. Not to give it a name or describe it. In fact, there is hardly any use giving it a name or describing it. One must try to enter into contact, to concentrate upon it, live that reality. And whatever the name you give it is not at all important once you have the experience. The experience alone counts. And when people associate the experience with a particular expression, and in so narrow a way, so closed up in itself that apart from this formula one can find nothing, that is an inferiority. One must be able to live that reality through all possible paths, all occasions, all formations. One must live it, for that indeed is true. For that is supremely good. That is all-powerful. That knows all. Yes, one can live that, but one cannot speak about it. And if one does speak, all that one says about it has no great importance. It is only a way of speaking, that is all. There is an entire line of philosophers and people who have replaced the notion of God by the notion of an impersonal absolute, or by a notion of truth, or a notion of justice, or even a notion of progress, of something eternally progressive. But for one who has within him the capacity of identifying himself with that, what has been said about it hasn't much importance. Sometimes one may read a whole book of philosophy and not progress a step farther. Sometimes one may be quite a fervent devotee of a religion and not progress. There are people who have spent entire lifetimes seated in contemplation and attained nothing. There are people, we have well-known examples, who used to do the most modest of manual works, like a cobbler mending old shoes, and who had an experience. It is altogether beyond what one thinks and says of it. It is some gift that's there. That is all. That's all that is needed. And all that is needed is to be that, to succeed in identifying oneself with it and live it. At times you read one sentence in the book, and that leads you there. Sometimes you read entire books of philosophy or religion, and they get you nowhere. There are people, however, whom the reading of philosophy books helps to go ahead. But all these things are secondary. There is only one thing that's important. That is a sincere and persistent will. For these things don't happen in a twinkling, so one must persevere. When someone feels that he is not advancing, he must not get discouraged. He must try to find out what it is in the nature that is opposing, and then make the necessary progress. And suddenly one goes forward. And when you reach the end, you have an experience. And what is remarkable is that people have followed altogether different paths, with altogether different mental constructions, from the greatest believer to the most unbelieving. Even materialists have arrived at that experience. It is the same for everyone, because it is true, because it is real, because it is the sole reality. And it is quite simply that. I do not say anything more. This is of no importance, the way one speaks about it. What is important is to follow the path, your path, no matter which. Yes, to go there. From the Mother, Questions and Answers, 1950 to 1951.